Welcome back to Master 79. In this video we take one complete ielts speaking part 2 cue card and the part 3 discussion that follows it, and we build a band 9 response from scratch. The topic is describe a person who inspired you to do something interesting. Here is the plan. The exact cue card. How to use the preparation minute. A brainstorm for each line on the card. The full model answer in 4 chunks, then the complete transcript. All 4 part 3 questions, each with a plan and a model answer. And finally a language bank you can lift from. First, the format. The examiner hands you a card. You get exactly 1 minute to make notes, and then you speak on your own for 1 to 2 minutes. Notice the last point on the right. If you stop after 50 seconds, you have not given the examiner enough language to reward. Being cut off at 2 minutes is exactly where you want to be. Here is the card itself. 3 prompts, and then a 4th instruction on its own line. Explain why he or she inspired you. That last line is a separate task, and it is the one candidates most often rush or skip entirely. Now the preparation minute. 4 boxes, 1 per line of the card. Choose your one concrete scene before you write anything else, because the rest of the plan hangs off it. Give the Y box the most space, and keep every note to about 2 words, because you cannot read an answer aloud and still sound natural. Line 1. Who it was. Mr. Koa, my physics teacher. Final year of secondary school, not a celebrity, not a parent, deliberately ordinary and specific. The language to aim for is on the right. Name the person and the activity in your first sentence. The examiner should know what the story is about within 10 seconds. Line 2. When he/she inspired you. About 6 years ago. Final year of school, anchor it to a life stage, not just a date. The language to aim for is on the right. Would have been about, is worth more than an exact date. Hedging is a band 9 fluency feature, not a weakness. Line 3. What he/she did to inspire you. The method, he refused to make it feel like a lesson. One specific scene, the 2-hour drive out of the city. The language to aim for is on the right. This is where most candidates list. Don't pick one moment and narrate it. That is what fills 2 minutes without repetition. Line 4. And explain why he/she inspired you. He was still genuinely curious himself. Not performing it, he never made anyone feel stupid for not knowing. The language to aim for is on the right. The explain why line is where the band is won. Leave the most space for it in your notes and the strongest sentence for the end. And this is what the paper actually looks like after 60 seconds. Fragments, abbreviations, nothing you could read aloud. That is the point, because notes you can read become a recited answer, and a recited answer is audible immediately.
I'd like to talk about my old physics teacher, Mr. Koa, who's probably the single biggest reason I ended up taking up amateur astronomy, which for someone who used to find science fairly dry is quite a turnaround. He taught me in my final year of secondary school, so this would have been about 6 years ago now. On paper, he was just the physics teacher, but he also ran a very informal astronomy club that met on Friday evenings, maybe 8 of us sitting on the roof of the school building with a rather battered telescope he'd bought secondhand and repaired himself. What he did essentially was refuse to make it feel like a lesson. He never lectured us. He'd simply point the telescope at something, Saturn usually, because Saturn converts people, and then step back and let us fight over who got to look first. Once we were hooked, he'd start feeding us the physics almost by stealth. I remember him driving a group of us 2 hours out of the city one weekend, purely, so we could see the Milky Way without light pollution washing it out. I'd never seen a proper night sky before, and I don't think I've ever been that quiet for that long. As for why he inspired me, I think it came down to the fact that he was unmistakably still curious himself. He wasn't performing enthusiasm for our benefit. He'd get visibly excited about things he'd already seen 100 times. And he never made anyone feel stupid for not knowing something, which at the age matters enormously. 6 years on, I've got my own telescope. I plan trips around meteor showers, and I've learned a fair amount of patience from it. You often drive for hours and get nothing but clouds. So he didn't just give me a hobby, he changed how I approach learning anything new.
Here is the first half of that answer in full, so you can see how the sentences connect. Pause the video if you want to read it slowly. And the second half, including the explain why section and the closing line. So why does that answer score 6 things? Every line of the card is covered but told as a story rather than answered as a checklist. One extended scene carries the middle of the answer. The hedging is natural. The vocabulary is idiomatic without being showy. The grammar range is wide but never forced. And it lands on impact rather than trailing off. Now part 3. This is a discussion, not a story. The questions zoom out to people in general, to society, to causes and consequences. 40 to 60 seconds per answer is plenty, and you are never penalized for an unpopular opinion, only for refusing to commit to one. Every part 3 answer in this video uses the same 4 moves. Position, because, for example, and then but. That last move, conceding or limiting your own point, is the fastest way to sound like a real speaker rather than a rehearsed one. Question 1. Which types of people become role models in your society? Position. It has shifted noticeably in my lifetime, because status used to come from study and service, now from visibility. For example, teachers and doctors joined by entrepreneurs, athletes, creators. But the criteria changed to character vs visible achievement.
That's shifted noticeably in my lifetime, I'd say. Traditionally, the people held up as role models here were teachers, doctors, and academics, anyone whose status came from years of study and fairly quiet service. That admiration hasn't disappeared, but it's been joined by a much more visible group: entrepreneurs, athletes, and increasingly content creators with large followings online. What I find interesting is that the criteria have changed as well as the names. Older generations tended to admire people for their character and their sacrifice, whereas a lot of young people now gravitate towards visible achievement, the business someone has built, or the lifestyle they project. I wouldn't call that shallow necessarily, it's just a different definition of success.
Question 2. Do you agree that famous people have more responsibilities than ordinary people? Position. Broadly yes, but I'd want to qualify it. Because influence and responsibility are very hard to separate at scale. For example, what you endorse or say about gambling or mental health. But unfair to demand sainthood. Private life is where I draw the line.
Broadly, yes, though I'd want to qualify it. Nobody signs up to be a moral example simply by being good at football, and there is something unfair about expecting a 22-year-old athlete to behave like a saint. That said, influence and responsibility are quite hard to separate. If a few million people are watching what you endorse or what you say about gambling or mental health, then your choices genuinely carry consequences that mine don't. So I'd frame it less as a duty they volunteered for and more as an unavoidable side effect of scale. Where I would draw the line is their private lives. I don't think fame should cost someone their privacy entirely.
Question 3. What happens when young people lack good role models? Position. The vacuum gets filled, often by something worse. Because teenagers are looking for a template for how to be an adult. For example, no credible adult nearby, so an algorithm supplies one. But not always dramatic, sometimes just never seeing persistence.
I think the honest answer is that the vacuum gets filled by something, and often by something worse. Teenagers are naturally looking for a template for how to be an adult, and if there's nobody credible nearby, a parent, a coach, an older sibling, they'll take the template from wherever it's most available, which these days tends to be an algorithm. The consequences aren't always dramatic, though. Sometimes it's simply that a child never sees what persistence looks like up close, so they assume ability is innate and give up quickly. In more serious cases, you get young people drifting towards figures who offer certainty and belonging, but very little in the way of actual values. Either way, they are navigating without a map.
Question 4. What standards of behavior should teachers set? Position. Higher than average, but not impossibly high. Because children have a very sharp instinct for hypocrisy. For example, fairness, consistency, and saying I've no idea, let's look it up. But no perfection outside the classroom. They are entitled to normal lives.
Higher than average, I'd argue, but not impossibly high. The obvious ones are fairness and consistency. Children have an extremely sharp instinct for hypocrisy, and a teacher who has one rule for their favourites loses the room permanently. Beyond that, I'd say the most valuable standard is being willing to admit when they're wrong. The best teacher I ever had would happily say, I've no idea, let's look it up. And it did more for my confidence than any amount of encouragement. What I wouldn't demand is perfection outside the classroom. Teachers are entitled to ordinary human lives, and pretending otherwise just makes the job unappealing to exactly the people we most want doing it.
Here is the part 2 language bank. Do not memorize the story, memorize the frames. On paper he was just blank, but what he did, essentially, was. As for why he inspired me, those carry any topic. And the part 3 bank. Notice how many of these are ways of qualifying yourself. Broadly yes, though I would want to qualify it. That said, where I would draw the line is, these are what let you sound thoughtful instead of certain. A quick note on the score. Band 9. Here is our own quality assessment against the public ielts band descriptors. It is not a certified examiner score. Use it as a target for what strong answers sound like and get your pronunciation judged from your own recording, not from a transcript. Your turn. Take the same cue card, give yourself 60 seconds and 4 boxes and record 2 minutes. Play it back and ask one question. Did I tell one scene or did I list 4? Then answer just one part 3 question using position, because, for example, but. Tell me in the comments which part 3 question was hardest and subscribe for the next topic. See you in the next one.